Alrighty, welcome everyone into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, May 29th, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about roster construction. It feels like this might be a year where some philosophies change around the country, possibly. Then we'll get into a little bit of talk around the SEC spring meeting. Some very interesting quotes have come out from Greg Sankey and Kirby Smart and Billy Napier around all of the different stuff going on around the House settlement, around Jaden Rashada's lawsuit is a huge topic of conversation as well. Then we'll talk about Nick Harbor, a very, very talented athletic kid that might just be in the Olympics this time, sometime in the summer. Then we'll get into the most important players, non-quarterbacks, of course, for the big-time contenders. We did the 5 teams yesterday. We did their most important coaches. Now we're going to do the most important players, and we'll likely go back and forth with that for a little bit while we get through the contenders this year. And then we have another Spotlight Wednesday for you, and it is the Kentucky Wildcats. Definitely a ton riding on this year, a ton going into this year with a lot of different expectations. So we'll break down them towards the end of the show there. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have a kind of fun, interactive experience here, and I think that's good for all of us. But let's go ahead and jump right in, and let's talk about this roster construction issue, I suppose you could call it. But the transfer portal has been a big time player in college football for quite some time. Pretty much whenever it came to the forefront of the sport, a lot of people have been using it. And obviously there's been tons of different approaches to it. You can go everywhere from Deion Sanders to Dabo Swinney and find everything in between those two philosophies. So it's going to be fascinating to watch this obviously unfold over the next couple of years. But I want to focus in on this year a little bit, just a little bit closer, because when I look around the country this year, it feels like more than any other year, there are tons of teams that are slated to do really, really big things this upcoming year that also have a ton of transfer talent that is not only coming in, but coming in to start and coming in to play big time snaps. So I think you talk about Ole Miss, they brought in 22 guys. A lot of those guys are going to get big time snaps. You also have Florida State brought in 17. Same exact thing for them, especially with DJ being one of those guys. You then have, A&M added 28 guys. They could definitely make some noise. Miami and Bama added 15. Oregon added 14. And all of those guys on all 3 of those teams are really going to play big-time snaps. There's very few in those transfer portal classes that are not going to play right away for those teams. So it gives you an idea of kind of where the world is heading a little bit. And Colorado, obviously, with 42 incoming transfers, just out of this world. But it gives you an idea of kind of where everyone's head's at. If you were to ask me, I tend to lean that anywhere between 8 to 15 guys is likely the area you want to be in, because you likely want the portal to be kind of patchwork instead of, building the entire team. You want it to be something to supplement the team. And I think that's usually the way that you see the big time programs use it. Bama up towards the top at 15, but they lost a lot of guys as well. So they kind of had to be towards the top at 15. Same thing with Oregon, same thing with Miami, where you're still trying to kind of build out those rosters the way you want to see them. So I definitely believe that that's kind of the area you want to be in. Now, if you go a little bit above that, a little bit below that, it doesn't necessarily hurt you by any means. I think the big time examples we've seen, I suppose, of teams that have added 20 plus kids and had really successful seasons are 2021 Michigan State with Kenneth Walker and Peyton Thorne and all of those guys, and then 2022 USC when Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley came over. So those were both great teams, don't get me wrong. Both won 10 games, both did really incredible things and had guys on their teams that were, Heisman favorites at one point with Kenneth Walker, or the Heisman winner with Caleb Williams, but they didn't win their conference. So in the past, at least, it looks like there have been kind of a peak of what these teams can be, of what all these new, transfer portal influx of kids, they can be plenty talented and you can have really good teams, but you're going to need a different gear to get over that next level, is what it seemed like in the past. But it feels like there are a couple of teams this year that could possibly, blaze a new path in the transfer portal world. And the two I really want to focus in on are Ole Miss and Florida State. I think 2 of these teams are not only, relying on the transfer portal a ton going into this season, but also have a lot of aspirations for the season. Florida State coming off the year they just had 13-0, want to be back in that national conversation. And then Ole Miss bringing in a lot of the guys they did, they expect to be right there in the thick of things for the SEC this upcoming year. So it's going to be fascinating to watch these two teams. Let's start with Ole Miss. And as a team, they have a ton of things in place, and they had a ton of things in place before a lot of these transfers got here. But when you look at this team overall, if the transfer portal class does not hit, they're going to be very similar to what they were a year ago. Now, I think they did a great job of getting really experienced guys. They got Walter Nolan, they got Cam Alexander, they got Juice Wells on the offensive side of the ball. So they did a great job of getting the right guys in that building, so to say, if you're talking about the transfer portal. But you never really know how the 11 guys on defense are going to gel, because out of those 11, I would bet 5 of the starters will be transfer portal guys, at least 5 starters, possibly 6. So it's going to be fascinating to watch this kind of take shape. I think Ole Miss has every ability to be a SEC champion, to go into the playoff, to do remarkable things. Now, the offensive line gives me a little bit of worry. I think Nate Kalepo is a great player. I think some of the guys they brought in are big-time players, but I'm still a little bit skeptical of if they can put together the season that they need to on the front. But I do think they have that ability. They have tons of experience with the guys that they're bringing in, especially guys like Walter Nolan and Cam Alexander, and you have tons of chances to break down the door, to win the SEC, to do really remarkable things. The question is, can you do that? Can you buck the stereotypes that followed Michigan State and USC in past years and become a team that kind of sets its own path? And then when you talk about Florida State, it's a little bit different. They brought in fewer guys, of course, but they also had more guys leave for the NFL and things of that nature. And also, this is kind of the way Mike Norvell goes about business. He's done this in the past. He's obviously hung out around that kind of 17, 20, 15, kind of that area of transfer portal people, but all of them have been big-time players. You added Braden Fisk. You added Jared Verse. Tons of players on either side of the ball. Keon Coleman, obviously a great example. Tons of guys on either side of the ball that made big-time impacts for them, and this year is no different. You have DJ Uiagalelei. He needs to hit. That's a non-negotiable for Florida State to be as good as they're going to be. He needs to play probably better football than he has played in the past and be the player that they're hoping that he can be, really. And then you have Roy Dell Williams coming in from Alabama needs to hit. Malik Benson needs to get healthy, of course, first. But once he gets healthy, I think he probably needs to be their wide receiver 1. So the way I look at Florida State is, if all of those guys hit, if they did what they've done in the past and picked out really, really good guys in the transfer portal, then they'll be fine, and they'll be in the ACC conversation, and everything will be fine and dandy down in Tallahassee. But if DJ doesn't work out, if he's, throws for 58% on the season, completion percentage, and doesn't necessarily light the world on fire, you're going to have a lot of questions. And it's going to be one of those years where you're left kind of wondering, what happened to the team that we had a year ago. And obviously a lot of those guys found their way out the door, but this defense is going to be really good still. And it won't matter much, to be totally honest with you, if DJ cannot hit the way that they're hoping. So those are two teams that absolutely could kind of buck these stereotypes and become a part of the national conversation and kind of get, beyond all of the craziness that has followed some of the transfer portal teams in the past. But they're still walking a little bit of a tightrope in a couple of those places. And then, obviously, the big-time example that would change the entire way that people go about business is if Colorado hits. If Deion and Colorado somehow figure out a way to make all this work, everyone's going to have to rethink the way they go about business. He added 52 guys in year 1. He's had 42 this year. So it's an entirely new team from when he showed up. And to be totally fair to him, that had to happen. It was a 1-11 team. It was not a team that was going to compete nationally. And you had to switch those guys out. Now, he did it very, very quickly and definitely ruffled some feathers in the process. But the reality is, this is the way he wants to go about business. He wants to build through the portal, not necessarily supplement. And if he can pull it off, it'll be a remarkable thing to watch. I think one of the things that I always think about when I look at Colorado is a lot of things could go right for them. A ton of things could go right. They could have a lot of transfer portal guys hit. They could have, a ton of good breaks in games. and they could still be an 8-9 win team. That's just the reality of where they're at right now. There's not a lot of depth on this team. There's not a lot of ability to really compete at the national level, at least from where I'm standing right now. Now, could they, figure things out, win 9 games, win 10 games, maybe even bust the door down and win the Big 12 and totally make people rethink the way they go about business? Sure. I just think they're definitely a thinner path than most and probably walking the tightest tightrope in the entirety of college football. And then you get into some other teams. You have Miami brought in 15 guys. You have Michigan State brought in 24, Washington 29, Louisville 31, Indiana 31. So tons of teams are leaning on this, and some of it is out of absolute necessity, like Colorado, like Michigan State lost a ton of guys. You have Florida State had to go into the portal to get some of these guys. So obviously, some of these teams are doing it out of necessity. Some of these teams are doing it because that's the way they want to go about business, and that's all well and good. I think if there was a year to kind of buck those stereotypes and kind of make transfer portal be the way you want to build a team instead of supplement a team, this might be the year. I think Ole Miss has a great opening to become a team that you look up in November and they have one loss, are heading to a playoff game, and a lot of the reason for that will be the transfer portal guys. Now, if you were to ask me, I tend to believe it's going to stay the same way. I tend to believe high school evaluation, recruiting, development are the meat, cheese, and bread of this sandwich. And then the transfer portal can be, the lettuce, the tomato, the onion, the mayo, whatever you want on that. But the reality is, from where I'm standing, the best teams in the country, the best programs in the country still recruit at the best. Georgia, Ohio State, all of those teams still recruit at the very, very top level on the high school level. And then they figure out what they need in the transfer portal, and then they go get it. So I tend to believe that's the way to go about business. Now, that can change. All of this can change very quickly, and I think if that was going to change at really any point in the future, this year might be the year to do it, because so many teams have that ability to get to a national perspective, but also do it with a lot of big-time transfer portal guys helping them out on the way there. So this will be kind of a fascinating thing to watch. If Ole Miss makes some noise, if Florida State makes some noise, especially if Colorado makes some noise, there will be some conversations being had with GMs, with head coaches, with position coaches about the way they want to build out their roster and how they want to go about business from here forward. But that'll be fascinating to watch. But we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the SEC spring meetings, the House case, the Jaden Rashada lawsuit had dominated conversation around there, but tons of really, really interesting things to look into, so we will definitely break that down right after this, so stick with us.